You've done everything right. You've stayed patient. You've tried to be understanding. You've been so careful not to push too hard, not to ask for too much, not to scare them off. And still, every time you finally start to get close, something shifts. You feel it happen almost in real time. That familiar retreat, that quiet withdrawal, and you're left standing there wondering what exactly you did to cause it. So here's a question worth sitting with. What if you didn't do anything wrong at all? What if the thing you've been most afraid to say, the thing you've swallowed over and over because you didn't want to rock the boat, is actually the exact thing that could have changed everything? There's one boundary, just one, and when it's set the right way, it does something that seems almost impossible. It makes an avoidant person stop running. It stirs something in them they've likely never felt in any previous relationship. And that feeling is what transforms someone who's spent their whole life pulling away into someone who actively chooses to stay. Stick with me through this, because by the time we're done, you'll understand something about avoidant attachment that a lot of people spend years unpacking in therapy without ever quite grasping. Before we go any further though, let's talk about what's actually going on inside the mind of someone with an avoidant attachment style, because you can't set this boundary effectively without first understanding the internal wiring behind how they experience closeness and connection. An avoidant person didn't simply wake up one morning and decide to become emotionally unavailable. That's the very first assumption you need to let go of completely. This pattern wasn't a choice. It was constructed, piece by piece, usually starting in early childhood, in moments where closeness itself felt threatening rather than comforting. Maybe there was a parent who was overwhelming, someone whose presence felt like too much. Maybe every time they expressed a need as a child, they were met with irritation, dismissal, or a kind of smothering attention that made them feel like they were losing themselves entirely. So their nervous system absorbed a very specific lesson early on. It learned that love and the loss of self tend to travel together. It learned that closeness often means being consumed. It learned that needing another person is one of the most dangerous things you can do. So they built walls. Not because they're broken people, and not because they're incapable of love, but because those walls were the only survival tool available to them in the relationships they were handed as children. Now fast forward to adulthood, when that same person tries to love someone. The moment you get too close, their nervous system sounds an alarm. It's not even a conscious thought. It's more primal than that, a biological signal flashing danger. And what it's registering as dangerous isn't actually you. It's closeness itself. It's intimacy. It's the terrifying possibility of needing someone so much that you either get swallowed by that need or devastated when it isn't met. So they do exactly what they were conditioned to do. They retreat, they go quiet, they suddenly seem busy all the time, they start noticing flaws in you that didn't bother them a week earlier. They begin questioning the relationship altogether, not because anything actually changed about you, but because their nervous system is urgently telling them to put distance between themselves and the closeness before it swallows them whole. And what does almost everyone do in response to that? They chase, they over-explain, they try harder to prove their love, they become more agreeable, more accommodating, more careful about every word they choose. They make themselves smaller and smaller, hoping that shrinking will somehow feel less threatening to the person pulling away. And that right there is the trap most people fall straight into, because the smaller you make yourself, the more clearly you're signaling that you don't actually believe in your own worth. And an avoidant person cannot feel safe next to someone who doesn't know their own value. Here's why that matters so much. An avoidant person's nervous system is essentially wired to search for cracks. It's constantly scanning for evidence that this relationship is going to either consume them or fall apart entirely. So when you chase, when you anxiously pursue, when you set aside your own needs just to accommodate theirs, you unintentionally become living proof of exactly what they fear most. You become proof that closeness creates an unequal dynamic where one person inevitably disappears into the other. Your anxiety, without you meaning it to, ends up confirming their deepest belief that love is destabilizing, that closeness always comes at the cost of your own identity. So what is this one boundary boundary that supposedly changes everything. It isn't a rule about their behavior. It isn't something you hand them like a list of demands. It isn't an ultimatum in the way people usually think of ultimatums. It's a boundary around your own participation in the pattern. And it sounds something close to this. I'm no longer available to keep showing up for someone who consistently shows me they're not available for me. That's the whole boundary in essence. But how you hold it, the energy behind it, the steadiness it comes from, is really what determines whether it works or completely falls apart. Let's break down what this boundary actually communicates to someone with an avoidant attachment style, because the message operates on several levels at once. First and foremost, it communicates safety through strength. An avoidant person has likely never encountered someone who loves them and still maintains a completely intact, non-negotiable sense of self. Every person who's loved them before probably eventually dissolved a little, made themselves smaller, begged, chased harder. And that dissolving, that anxious pursuing, is something the avoidant nervous system finds almost repellent. Not because they're cold-hearted, but because it confirms their worst fear, that love demands you abandon yourself to have it. But when you set this boundary and actually hold it, without anger, without trying to punish them, without dramatic exits, when you simply, quietly redirect your energy back towards your own life, something shifts inside them. They come face to face with something entirely unfamiliar. They meet someone who loves them and doesn't require them to change in order to feel okay. You become the first person who doesn't fall apart the moment they pull away. And that is one of the most disorienting and honestly one of the most beautiful experiences an avoidant person can have. Because when you stop chasing, when you genuinely turn your attention back towards your own life and your own sense of worth, they lose the very thing their nervous system has relied on to justify the distance. They lose your pursuit, and with nothing left to push against, they have nothing left to run from. For maybe the first time in their entire life, they're left sitting in the space created by their own ambivalence, actually feeling the absence of you instead of the relief they usually get from creating space. That's the moment everything can shift. And most people never actually get there, because the second the avoidant person shows even a flicker of pulling away, they can't tolerate the discomfort and start chasing again, which resets the whole cycle, which keeps the avoidant person running, which keeps the anxious partner chasing. Round and round it goes until one person burns out or gets hurt beyond repair. Now, I want to be really clear about something, because this is where the concept gets misunderstood the most. This boundary is not a manipulation tactic. It's not a game, and it's definitely not some strategy designed to win an avoidant person over. If you set this boundary secretly, hoping that pulling back will make them chase you, it simply won't work. The avoidant nervous system is remarkably good at detecting when something isn't authentic. They've spent their whole lives reading the emotional undercurrents in a room, because as children, their survival often depended on picking up on the emotional temperature of the adults around them and adjusting accordingly. So, if you pull back as a calculated move, as a strategy rather than a genuine choice, they will sense it. And that will only confirm their worst suspicion, that love is really just a game of manipulation, and that closeness always comes with strings attached. The only version of this boundary that actually works is the real one, the one where you genuinely decide, at the deepest level, that you're done pouring your heart into a direction that isn't meeting you halfway. The one where you honestly look at your own patterns and admit that all the chasing hasn't worked, and that you deserve love that doesn't require you to beg for basic presence. When the boundary comes from that place, it carries an entirely different energy. It isn't cold, it isn't punishing, it isn't even really about them anymore. It's about you finally choosing yourself. And ironically, that is one of the most magnetic things you can do in the context of a relationship with someone avoidant. Let's talk about what this actually looks like day to day, because understanding the theory is one thing, but seeing it in practice matters more. You notice the pulling away starting. The messages slow down, the warmth cools off, they start sounding vague. distant, maybe even a little irritable, and every instinct in your body is screaming at you to reach out, to ask what's wrong, to fix whatever's happening, to get back to the version of them you know is still in there. But instead, you don't reach out, not to punish them, not as some game to seem unbothered, but because you recognize that chasing someone who's actively withdrawing is a bit like watering a plant by pouring water on the ceiling. It never actually reaches the roots, it just creates a mess. So instead, you take that same energy, the energy you'd normally pour into anxious texts and calls and constantly monitoring their mood, and you redirect it toward yourself. You call a friend, you go for a workout, you finally start that project you've been putting off. You sit with the discomfort instead of scrambling to fix it. You let yourself actually feel the fear of being left rather than acting out of that fear. And then something starts to happen. You begin to feel a little better, not because the outer situation has changed, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself every time they pull away. You've kept yourself company through it. And that alone starts healing the anxious pattern that had you chasing in the first place. Meanwhile, on their end, the avoidant person is sitting in that same distance they created, and it's starting to feel different than usual. It doesn't bring them the familiar relief it normally would, because you're no longer there anxiously filling the space. The silence has a different texture now. It carries weight. And that weight is loss, real loss, possibly for the first time. Because in the past, you've always rushed in to fill whatever gap they created. But now the gap just sits there, empty, and they're the one left inside it. And the question they start asking themselves shifts. Instead of, how do I create more space? It becomes something closer to, why does this feel so different when they're not chasing me? That question right there is the first crack in the wall. That's where real change begins to take root. Now, does this mean every avoidant person eventually comes back around? Does it guarantee that once you stop chasing, they'll suddenly be ready for a secure, fulfilling relationship? No, not at all. And this next part deserves complete honesty, because you deserve honesty far more than you deserve comforting half-truths. Some avoidant people, once you stop chasing, will simply let the relationship go. They'll feel relief that the tension has resolved without ever doing the internal work required to actually show up differently. And if that happens, it's not proof that you did anything wrong. It's proof that this particular person wasn't in a place where they could actually receive what you were offering. That's painful, genuinely, deeply painful. But it's also valuable information, maybe the most important information you can get about whether this relationship ever had the capacity to grow into something healthy. Here's the thing about the avoidant people who do eventually turn around, who actually put in the work. They don't do it because of chasing. They do it because your boundary revealed something to them that endless pursuit never could have. It revealed that you know your own worth. It showed them that your love is a conscious choice, not a compulsive habit. It demonstrated that being with you means being with someone who won't disappear into the relationship, which in turn means they don't have to disappear from it just to protect themselves. You've shown them a possibility they may never have believed existed, that love doesn't have to cost you your sense of self, that closeness can actually be safe. That intimacy doesn't have to equal consumption. That's the real gift hidden inside this boundary. Not that it traps someone or manipulates them into staying, but that it gives them a genuine glimpse of what a secure, grounded relationship actually feels like from the inside. It lets them experience the quiet pull of real, steady love, not the push-pull dynamic they're used to, not the chase they've spent a lifetime learning to run from, but a calm, warm, self-respecting presence that essentially says, I want you here, but I don't need you here in order to survive. And for a nervous system that has spent decades believing love only comes in the form of being consumed or being abandoned, that message is nothing short of revolutionary. Let's go a bit deeper into something most conversations about avoidant attachment tend to skip entirely: your own healing throughout all of this. Because here's the truth: you cannot set this boundary from a wounded, reactive place and expect it to actually land the way it's meant to. If you're setting it while secretly hoping it'll magically fix them, it won't work. If you're setting it from a place of buried resentment or accumulated frustration you've been holding in for months, it won't come across clean. There will be an edge to it, a kind of brittleness, and an avoidant person will pick up on that brittleness immediately and treat it as one more reason to retreat. This boundary has to come from somewhere quiet and solid inside you. It has to be rooted in a genuine peace with the possibility that setting it might actually mean losing them, not performing acceptance of that outcome, but truly arriving at it. Genuinely recognizing that you'd rather be whole and alone than slowly disappearing while technically together with someone. Getting to that place requires doing some real internal work of your own. It means examining honestly why you keep reaching for someone who keeps retreating. And if you're willing to really sit with that question, it can take you somewhere important. Why do you keep pursuing someone who pulls away? What does distance mean to you on a deeper level? Does it feel oddly familiar? Does the anxiety of chasing someone unavailable somehow feel more real, more normal, than the calm of being with someone consistently present? Because sometimes chasing an avoidant partner isn't really about that person at all. Sometimes it's an old wound dressed up in new clothing. Sometimes we're unconsciously reaching for a partner the same way we once reached for a parent who was inconsistently present, sometimes there and sometimes gone. And somewhere along the way, we learned that when someone is inconsistent, you have to try harder, be better, do more just to earn their presence. If that's the pattern playing out inside you, then this boundary isn't just for them, it's for you too. It becomes the moment you decide to stop replaying an old childhood dynamic with an adult who can't give you what you needed back then any more than the original person could give it to you now. That's the real work underneath all of this. And it's the kind of work that changes far more than just this one relationship. It changes every relationship that comes after it. Because once you heal your side of this pattern, once you genuinely become someone who no longer chases unavailability, you stop attracting it in the first place. You stop resonating with it entirely. The people who once seemed magnetic simply because they were slightly out of reach start to feel draining instead. And the people who show up consistently, who are warm, steady, and reliable, start to feel like a relief rather than something boring. That shift inside your own nervous system might genuinely be the most valuable gift you can give yourself. And it starts with this single boundary. Let's also talk about what this boundary is not, because that matters just as much as understanding what it is. It's not telling someone you're done unless you actually mean it. Empty ultimatums are some of the most destabilizing things you can bring into a relationship with an avoidant person, because their nervous system is already primed to expect that relationships are unpredictable and unsafe. If you say you're walking away and then don't, you've just confirmed that your words don't hold weight, which in turn confirms their belief that the relationship isn't safe, which gives them yet another reason to keep protecting themselves through distance. So only commit to what you're genuinely prepared to follow through on. If you say you won't keep reaching out while they're withdrawing, then don't reach out. And if you can't actually hold that line yet, don't say it until you can, because a boundary you can't maintain does more damage than having no boundary at all. This also isn't about using silence as a weapon. There's a real meaningful difference between redirecting your energy inward because you genuinely need to, and giving someone the silent treatment purely to make them feel bad. One comes from self-respect. The other comes from a need for control. And an avoidant person, even if they can't quite name it, will feel that distinction. Punishing silence tends to trigger their defenses even harder. Genuine self-redirection, on the other hand, creates real space that they can actually feel the absence within. And this isn't about becoming cold either. You don't have to turn distant, detached, or emotionally withholding to hold this boundary. You're allowed to stay warm. You're allowed to stay kind. You're allowed to still genuinely care about this person. This boundary is really just about where you direct your active energy. It's not about shutting your heart down. It's about keeping your heart at home while you wait to see whether they're willing to actually show up for it. And finally, this boundary isn't meant to last forever. It's not a permanent wall you build and then live behind indefinitely. It's a temporary redirection of your energy that opens space for the truth to surface naturally. Either they start to feel the absence and move toward you with real change behavior, or they don't. And either way, you gain the clarity you need to make a different decision about your own life going forward. Both outcomes, even the painful one, are better than staying stuck indefinitely in the exhausting cycle of chasing someone who keeps running. Here's what I really want you to take away from everything we've covered today. You are not the problem. Your capacity for love isn't the problem. Wanting closeness and reciprocity isn't some character flaw. It's not too much, and it isn't neediness. It's one of the most human things about you. The real issue is that you've been pouring that love into a container that was built to deflect it, and then blaming yourself every time it ran right off. The avoidant person in your life isn't a villain in this story. They're someone whose nervous system learned, early and painfully, to protect itself in ways that make loving them feel like navigating a minefield. That deserves genuine compassion. But compassion doesn't mean self-sacrifice. It doesn't mean giving endlessly without ever receiving anything back. It doesn't mean you're obligated to keep reaching towards someone who keeps stepping back. You can hold real compassion for someone's wounds while still deciding you can't keep being the one who gets hurt by them indefinitely. Both things can be true at once. This boundary is simply how you hold both truths at the same time. I see your wounds. I understand where they came from. I care about you deeply, and I will not keep shrinking myself while you decide whether you're willing to meet me here. Both statements, held together, without apology. That's the boundary. That's the one that actually changes everything. Not because it guarantees they'll come back to you, but because it guarantees that no matter how things unfold, you'll walk away knowing you chose yourself. That you refused to disappear, that you held your own hand in the moments they couldn't hold it for you, and that, more than any single relationship outcome, is what finally breaks this cycle for good. So take a breath. Let what you've just learned settle in, and then go practice it. Not perfectly, and not all at once, but one moment at a time, one choice at a time. Every time you redirect your energy back toward yourself instead of pouring it into a direction that isn't meeting you there, you're healing, you're growing, you're becoming someone a secure, emotionally available person can actually reach. And whether that person ends up being the avoidant partner in your life finally choosing to do the work, or someone entirely new who crosses your path later, one thing remains true either way: you'll be ready. Because you'll have done the one thing most people in your position never manage to do. You'll have chosen yourself first, and once you do that, everything else really does begin to change.